Hello and welcome to a New Year's Eve edition of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll do our best to spread a little bit of festive and New Year's cheer today, but it might not be easy. I'm Tyrone Marshall hosting, joined by Samuel Luckhurst at the end of December 2024. United have lost 6 games in December 2024, lost 5 games in December 2023. 11 of their last 17 December games have been defeats. Season's greetings from all at Manchester United, I'm sure. This is the Manchester is Red podcast sponsored by NordVPN. And a word from our sponsors. First of all, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential if you're travelling over the new year. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, changing your virtual location to anywhere across the world, allowing you to stream your favourite series wherever you are and keep up to date with all the unmissable sports. If you're out of the country, make sure you've got NordVPN to watch the last few days of the darts from New Year's Day. That is what I'll be doing. Unfortunately, I am stuck in the country. And if you're a real sucker for punishment, then there is some football on at the weekend. But you might want to try and avoid that, to be honest. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester and use the code Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. And there'll be a link in this podcast description. That's the formalities over. Like I say, I'm Tyrone Marshall. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, how are you? Are you looking forward to bringing 2024 to an end later?
Oh yeah, well, it's been a bit of a annus horribilis for United, even though they did surreally win a trophy in 2024. But I suspect that it will not be a quiet 2025 covering the club, given the state of form they're in as we segue into the new year.
Absolutely. And did they save the worst for last, or is it simply too crowded a field to give that honour to Manchester United 0, Newcastle 2?
I mean, in the end, it's so bad that in the end there wasn't a cacophony of boos, and I don't think we were expecting there to be any, because the 14th place side in the league lost to the team that rose to 5th last night, and I think we all expected United to lose. And then when we saw the team sheets, we absolutely knew United were going to lose. They only lost 2-0. They've made a habit of losing at home 3-0 over the past 18 months. So they avoided that. And the fact that we're talking in that tone or with that angle, that gives you an idea of how dire the state of play is at the club. And it does get worse with every week. The first half hour last night had just about everything that a Manchester United fan would not want to see. It was a capitulation. But I said to my editor, our editor, sorry, Ross Jackson, he messaged me saying lost for words. And I said, mate, they've been 2-0 down at half-time to Newcastle at home twice in the past 6 or 7 years. It happened last season in the League Cup. They were 2-0 down at home to them at half-time. Of course, towards the end of Mourinho's reign as well, I think they were 2-0 down inside some like 10 or 15 minutes. It was actually worse that day. But United did have a comeback. They did win 3-2. You have absolutely no faith in this team to mount comebacks. I thought around the time of the City game and the Tottenham game that air of inevitability about United was starting to slowly, gradually come back. The fact that they scored 2 goals 115 seconds apart to turn defeat into victory at City, the way they went down with a fight against Spurs and how well they played for the majority of the game that night. But they are just distant memories now, and it's turned to dust. They've lost every game since. I don't think Ruben Amorim thought they would be in a rut this bad. The fact that relegation is being mentioned at his press conferences, and he's almost entertaining the mention of relegation as well. He said, I mean, he conducts himself really well again last night, his post-match press conference, and he said this club needs a shock, referring to the threat of relegation, which I think it is fair to say there is that threat of relegation. We're halfway through the season. United are 7 points above the relegation zone. They're only 7 points better off than Ipswich Town, who were promoted back to the Premier League for the first time in 22 years in May. This is the dire state they are in. And every game that is coming up it looks treacherous in one way or another. I mean, the next two games are just about the worst two games that they could have. Liverpool away in the Premier League, Arsenal away in the FA Cup. Their domestic season could effectively be over before the end of January, apart from having to fight for survival, to stay in the top flight, which are words I don't think any of us ever imagined we would ever say in our careers covering Manchester United. But that's the reality of it. And it's got to the point where you look at this squad and you think, well, just about anyone is expendable. If there was an offer that was acceptable for almost any player, you would be inclined to take it, because this is the worst Manchester United team in more than 50 years. I spoke to a friend who I quite often have a natter with before games, just outside the press box last night, and I said to him, like, when was the last time it was truly this bad? And he said without hesitation the relegation season, and he remembered a game where they lost 1-0 to Tottenham. Ralph Coates scored the winner. I looked it up. It was March 1974, so a month before United went down. And he said United was so impotent and so hopeless that pigeons were pottering about in Pat Jennings' penalty area. Pat Jennings, of course, the Tottenham goalkeeper. And it's almost as if United are getting to that. You look at this United side who haven't scored 3 games running. It's 270 minutes now without a goal, and it feels like a matter of time until the pigeons start assembling in the opponent's penalty area at Old Trafford.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was so bad last night that it actually felt like 2-0 was a good result for United in the end, because I think after 20 minutes, we all thought this could be 4 or 5. It was so, to start a game that poorly is beyond belief, really. It was so bad. There was no pressure on the ball. Højlund was bullied by Shah from the get-go. It was on his heels to collect an early pass. Zirkzee giving it away straight away. Casemiro and Eriksen were as useful as training cones out there compared to Jimenez and Tonali and Joe Linton. And the first 20 minutes, it was like a training exercise for Newcastle, wasn't it? It was so bad. And I mean, maybe we touched on it in the same segment, but Amorim had to change something, and Zirkzee was the fall guy. I mean, when Mainoo was getting ready, we were discussing who was it going to be, and I thought maybe Eriksen. It was Zirkzee in the end. I mean, the reaction felt pretty telling, didn't it? You had to feel sorry for him at that moment. It's not his fault. He was signed. He should never have been signed for Manchester United. But it was, as opening half an hour's go, it was as catastrophic as it gets, wasn't it?
Yeah, and what I'd say in terms of the reaction to him coming off, I mean, I thought the reaction was deplorable. I really felt sorry for him at that time. He isn't good enough. He shouldn't have been signed. United fans were starting to get on his back before he came off because he lost the ball a couple of times. Clearly, they disapprove of the way the way he goes about his job, his body language. It gives where he's quite he has a not a lethargy, but it is a little bit like that Berbatov lackadaisical style. And when United are in the rut that they're in, fans want fire and brimstone from players, and Zirkzee doesn't operate that way. There's a reason why he had a reasonably decent season in Italy. That the pace there's a reason why Italian football is often likened to chess. It's because it operates at the pace of a chess match. It feels like at times watching it, and that's why Zirkzee seemed to function quite well in it. But when he came off, I did really feel for him. He's a human being. It was quite telling. I mean, Anthony Gordon offered him quite a humane pat on the back as well, because I think as a fellow professional, that is the ultimate humiliation, to be substituted in the first half. And it has happened to a few United players in recent times. I mean, it happened against Newcastle in that Mourinho game back in October 2018. Eric Bailly came off after about 19 minutes, and I think it might have been McTominay who came off at half time rather than the first half. But I remember Phil Neville coming off in the first half of a game, probably in 2002-03. So it's happened a number of occasions, but that was by far and away the worst reaction to a substitution, to a player coming off, in that thousands were celebrating it. It was the only thing they celebrated last night. there were boos as well for him. There were boos when he was going down the tunnel because he clearly wanted to get out of sight. He was clearly affected by it. Somebody, I think, went and fetched him. I'm not too sure who it would have been, but Amorim suggested that was the case. And fair dues to those Manchester United fans that when Zirkzee did re-emerge, they offered him encouraging applause, because as loud as that reaction was to Zirkzee coming off last night, and we saw fans around us who were like braying, really. They were delighted that he was coming off. They were genuinely reveling in his misfortune. And I know in the heat of the moment, matchgoers can allow emotions to get the better of them. But there are a couple of guys who sit a few rows in front of the press box. And I always remember one of them. He bought a Mourinho United scarf just after Christmas in 2015. So Van Gaal was still in charge, and Van Gaal was still going to be in charge for about 5 more months. But one of the scarf sellers on the forecourt outside the East Stand had brought Mourinho United scarves, because it looked like he was going to get the United job sooner or later. And this guy, who has had a season ticket holder for as long as I've been in the press box, had a Mourinho scarf on in 5 months before he was made manager, whilst United actually had a manager in. So you do get some idiots who go to Old Trafford, whether it's frequently or infrequently. And I had a message off a friend who sits in the Sir Alex Ferguson stand at halftime last night, and he was spitting feathers about the reaction to Zirkzee's substitution. Spoke to another friend this morning. She said the same thing as well, a bit more caustically, in fairness. And as loud as that reaction was, I still think the majority inside the stadium would have utterly disapproved of the stick that Zirkzee got at that time. As I said, I thought it was pretty deplorable. The only player who's got a similar level of stick to that has been Harry Maguire, and that has really been during friendlies, where you get casual supporters, with the greatest of respect to them, who don't go to Manchester United matches regularly, and they don't really have an understanding of, I suppose, loyal match day etiquette, if you can call it that. You kind of expect an element of the pantomime in pre-season friendlies, because they are attended by and large by supporters who do not go to Manchester United games on a frequent basis because of where they live and where the games are being played. And in fairness to Maguire, he's recovered from that. He has come back from that. But I think Zirkzee's race is run. I said probably 2 months ago, I think he's a lost cause, that United just need to cut loose next year, just to hold their hands up, accept that they made a mistake in signing him. It's not his fault that he was signed. He is, he's I suppose the latest scapegoat. But as I said, well done to those supporters who did actually offer him applause. I mean, it's fans say you don't boo one of your own, and that has happened quite often at Old Trafford in recent years. Rashford has copped some flack. Anthony Marshall got cheered off when he was substituted on his final appearance for the club last season. I could understand it more with Marshall, because he was there just taking United for a ride. There was minimal effort from him. He was putting his feet up about 5 months every season, frequently being injured, not really exerting himself during games. But in the case of Zirkzee, I did just feel genuine sympathy for him, and I imagine he will play for United again. And I can't imagine he'll ever get a reception as bad as that again. But that will have been the lowest moment of his professional career by far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just touching on the booing as well. I mean, certainly some of those boos were for Zirkzee. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the boos were fans booing fellow fans, essentially, for their initial reaction when his number went up. Because, like you say, I think we've all had messages or seen social media where people were appalled at it.
Yeah, I think possibly, but there were boos again when he approached.
When he went down the tunnel, yeah,
and that's not
for him.
That's clearly for him.
That was for him. That was obviously for him.
Yeah, so I mean, they can try and some fans can try and offer different takes on it all you like, but the fact of the matter was, thousands cheered the fact that he was coming off, thousands booed him as he went off, and thousands not thousands maybe, but quite a few audibly booed him as he went down the tunnel as well.
Totally. And you're right. You say none none of this is his fault. I mean, Joshua Zirkzee is not good enough to play for Manchester United. I think we'd probably all agree with that. I don't think we've seen enough to suggest it, but in a way, and this is what I did my piece on this morning, he's the fall guy of atrocious recruitment. You have a terrible transfer window, and then you try and correct it with another terrible transfer window. And the only reason Manchester United signed Joshua Zirkzee this summer, and we'll kind of get on to recruitment a bit more in the second half, but the only reason they signed Joshua Zirkzee is because he was relatively cheap and he had a release clause. And I think virtually every true judge said he's not good enough and he doesn't fit. And this is now where we are, that they've made another £36 million mistake that they're going to have to correct again. And I mean, they did improve for that change. Mainu, I mean, it's probably an easy game to come on and look good in, to be fair, given the low bar that had been set. But Mainu improved them. But they never looked like scoring. And that's 3 games in a row without scoring. Now, 3 games in a row with barely looking like scoring. The difference between number 9s was night and day, I thought. I mean, I thought Isak had a pretty poor second half, to be honest. But first half, he was a real problem for United. Højlund was just bullied by Schär. He was on his heels constantly. Schär just walking around him, taking the ball off him at times. Amorim slapped his thighs in disgust at one such moment in the second half. And, you know, I mean, Højlund has got more of a chance than Zirkzee. I still don't think he's ever going to cut it at Manchester United. And
no,
there's a lot of problems with this team, but one of them is at striker, isn't it? And there's just the reason you'd look at this team and think they might get dragged into a scrap is you just cannot see where the goals come from at all.
Well, in the press room before the game, they were replaying the Ronaldo's second debut from September 2021, which of course was home to Newcastle. And it was a reminder of a time when United did have an actual goal scorer in their squad. And this could only happen at United. The goal scorer was deemed by many to be the problem that season, even though he was winning a lot of games for them. You take him out of that team and Marcus Rashford, papers over the cracks for a season while he's in the midst of negotiations for a new contract. And since then, they've just not had a remotely consistent or reliable goal scorer. And that was the dread going into last season. I remember when we were in the press room in UCSD, and United confirmed that they were signing Højlund, and they confirmed that they'd actually spent more than they were going to spend on him. And I don't think any of us in that room were remotely convinced that they were getting a good deal here, or that this was good. This represented good recruitment. You looked at his goal scoring record at his previous 3 clubs, and it was mediocre at best. And it wasn't as if he was playing in particularly taxing or testing leagues. He'd had 1 season in Italy. Copenhagen didn't really bother with him too much. He was discarded quite quickly. He did quite well at Sturm Graz, but that was not the profile of striker that Manchester United needed. And we've been through it ad nauseum why they should have gone all out for Harry Kane, even if they just got 3 good years out of him. But if Kane goes into that squad, that's going to perk up Rashford. Rashford knows him from England. Rashford's going to see someone there who's, he's on my level, or I'm on his level, and we can collaborate here and we can kick on now when things could get even better this season. And I'm not saying that Manchester United should just sign players to massage the ego of one of their highest earners, but it was absolutely in their interests to get a proven goal scorer that summer. And it was one of 2 choices, really. It was either Harry Kane or it was Victor Osimhen. It was never going to be Osimhen for the price Napoli wanted, but Kane was attainable. And I'm still convinced that they could have got him. And even if it had to wait until the final day of the transfer window, who cares? The guy's Premier League proven. All he had to do was drive up the M6 or take a flight from Heathrow to Manchester, no problem. He'd have settled in straight away. It would have absolutely been worth it. And they have since spent £185.5 million on 2 strikers who are absolutely not good enough. And Isak cost Newcastle £63 million in 2022. United signed Højlund a year later for £64 million. Only United would look at 2 Scandinavian strikers and sign the demonstrably inferior one, but also pay more money for him. Isak has got 12 Premier League goals this season. Højlund's got 2 Premier League goals. As you said last night, even Zirkzee has got more Premier League goals than Højlund. It is getting to the point where you're more disappointed in Højlund than Zirkzee, because you look at Zirkzee and you know immediately he's not got the attributes to be or the skill set to be playing or leading the line for Manchester United. He should just not be at the club. Højlund is a bit different in that he has got some attributes that are suited to the Premier League. There is a bit of pace there. He has got more physicality. He does play, he does play more as a number 9. But then you watch him and he's almost always a boy among men. And it was the case again last night when he was up against Shah and Dan Burn. Sometimes a striker can cause such havoc. Both like centre halves are almost fighting each other to try and take him on. Dan Burn just left Shah to it last night. He didn't need to get involved whatsoever. It was like, right, Fabian can take care of this because he's got it covered. He's Højlund's minder for the night. There were times when Dan Burn was venturing into United's half because he had the freedom to do it. And Højlund, just nothing sticks to him. His hold-up play is absolutely atrocious. He doesn't score enough goals. He had a chance last night. He didn't take it. He scored most of his goals, it feels like, in Europe. I know he had quite a good Champions League group stage last season. He scored a few goals in the Europa League this season. But stats like that just bore me to tears. Yes, he scored quite a few goals in a Champions League group stage that United went out of. And in those games that he scored, United didn't win any of them. He got 2 against Copenhagen. They lost 2 against Galatasaray, lost that. 1 at Bayern Munich, they lost that. This season, he's got some goals in the Europa League. It's a lower level. It's lower quality. But he is a Europa League standard striker, Højlund. At best, he is a substitute striker for United. And as I've said before, his entry level had to be Javier Hernandez. Instead, United over-promoted him. He's overpriced. And that is looking a worse still by the day, really. And the circumstances surrounding it as well. He switches to Kees Vos. Kees Vos represents Erik ten Hag. All of a sudden, Rasmus Højlund is signing for Manchester United to play under ten Hag. It was never a good look unless Højlund performed. And he is, with the exception of, was it February, wasn't it, when he was on a very good goal-scoring run until he got injured. He has not performed for Manchester United. There have been a handful of games where he's cut it, but he should not be the Manchester United number 9. He should not be starting for Manchester United, but that's what Amorim is saddled with. It's Zirkzee or Højlund. And you summarised it perfectly on Friday's podcast when you said you watch Højlund and you think, Zirkzee should start the next game. And then you watch Zirkzee and you think, Højlund should start the next game. Last night, I wouldn't have played either of them. Amorim played both of them and United were worse for it.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. That's all for the first part of the Manchester Red podcast. We'll be back after the break to look ahead to a pretty daunting trip this weekend. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast then. We're exactly halfway through the season and it feels bizarre to be even saying this, but the Manchester United manager is talking about relegation. Like we say, 4 points above the relegation zone, 7 points above the relegation zone. I mean, how serious a threat is relegation at this stage of the season?
Well, I must admit, we're so accustomed to hearing some absolute dreadful songs from the away end at Old Trafford. I mean, the Bournemouth fans were appalling recently, and they were winning 3-0. But the standard of their songbook was horrendous. But I was tickled to hear Newcastle fans "Say Hello to Sunderland" on Monday night. That was actually quite witty, and I still think if United play Sunderland next season, it will be in the Premier League. But the fact that we are debating whether they'll be playing Sunderland in the Championship or the Premier League, again, really does highlight the severe malaise that's going on at United. I think that Ipswich won last night and they won against Chelsea, and that represented a bad result for United because Ipswich are now 7 points behind them, and Ipswich occupy the final relegation place. In this season that is becoming quite apocalyptic, I still think that there will be 3 teams worse than United in the league come the final weekend of the campaign. Southampton are doomed. I think Leicester, who played quite well against City, on Sunday, but lost again. Looked pretty hopeless. Their squad is a championship standard squad, and I think they're past the point of no return. I don't think Van Nistelrooy has necessarily got the coping skills to really pull them out of the mire. Wolves have had a really good managerial bounce already, taking 7 points out of 9 under Vitor Pereira. Ipswich haven't won enough games, and I suspect they won't win enough games in the second half of the season. I mean, United are 18 points away from the magic 40 number, but as Michael Crick said to me last night, it's difficult to see where those 18 points are going to come from over the next 19 games. I mean, you look at their matches league matches in January. Liverpool United fans who are in the Anfield Road end on Sunday are filled with dread about that. They are wondering how many they're going to get beaten by, as they felt when they went there in April 2022 and January 2020. I don't think many people are expecting anything other than Liverpool win that game, and it does already feel a question of how many Liverpool are going to win by. Southampton at home after that is the one game that Manchester United would want to have, but there will be quite a lot of pressure going into that because they will actually be expected to win, and woe betide them if they don't beat one of the worst teams that have ever played in the Premier League and seem to have hired a manager who is far more nowhere near as inspiring as the previous manager, who was just essentially playing them back into the Championship with his ridiculous insistence on trying to make Championship players, ball playing defenders who can cut it at Premier League level. I think they've also got, is it Brighton at home and Fulham away in January, and those two teams, I'm pretty sure they're both in top half of the table. They are difficult games. There are no games for Manchester United in this day and age that are gimmies in the Premier League, and the Premier League is a more competitive league in general. I don't think its standard is the best it's ever been. There have been more seasons where the standard has been higher, but it is tighter. It is more competitive. Having, I think I went through it recently, and all but 2 teams in the Premier League have won at Old Trafford since United last won the title in 2013. One of those 2 teams that haven't won it are Ipswich, who have not played at United in the Premier League. They've only played at Old Trafford once since 2013. That was in the League Cup. The other side of Brentford. So that's a pretty damning stat on Brentford, who, of course, should have, there have been a couple of occasions where they should have actually should have won at Old Trafford, certainly last season and possibly this season as well. And that's the worry. Amorim has said they need a shock, and I absolutely agree, but they also need a jolt in terms of recruitment, and January has come at the right time, but also they have not got a pot to pee in. And that was an issue a couple of years ago. The way they've operated in recent years has been pretty much since post-pandemic. It's felt like it's that you invest heavily in the summer and then you hope you don't have to do anything in the winter. And United being United, in pretty much every winter transfer window post-pandemic, they have needed to do something, or they have done something. And when they haven't done something, they have had the most awful second half of the season, with the exception, of course, winning the FA Cup last season. But they still finished 8th last season. It was the worst United side in 34 years in terms of their league finish. In 2022, Ralph Rangnick was very candid about the hopelessness and the incompetence of the scouting department in terms of not going for a forward in January, and he thought, as he said at the time, there were options out there. Liverpool signed Luis Diaz, Tottenham signed Dejan Kulusevski, Manchester City agreed a deal for Julian Alvarez, Juventus signed Vlahovic from Fiorentina, and he was specifically talking about attacking players as well. And of course, those 4 players are attacking players, and he was referring to the fact that Mason Greenwood was going to be unavailable indefinitely. There were also some other issues, and that Anthony Marshall was allowed to go out on loan. Edinson Cavani could not be trusted, given how often he was injured. I think he didn't even score in the second half of that season as well. So there was absolutely a case to sign a forward at the 11th hour. And they proved the following year that they were capable of signing a player at the 11th hour when they brought Marcel Sabitzer in from Bayern Munich on loan after Christian Eriksen was injured a few days before the window closed. And Sabitzer was a pretty decent player for United, I think, in the 4 or 5 months that he was at the club. And of course, that was the month that they brought Weghorst in. But 20 years ago, say in January 2004, Ferguson decided United needs a striker. He wants Louis Zaha. United can make Fulham an offer. They cannot refuse, and they sign Zaha. Now, United literally cannot afford Fulham striker. They could not afford to sign Rodrigo Muniz, who would probably be an upgrade on Højlund and Zirkzee, but they do not have the finances to get him. And they are completely dependent at the time of speaking on sales. And that's why Marcus Rashford being so public in his desire to leave is a blessing, because that does create a bit of a market. It does make it more likely that he could go. And if he does go, or when he does go, they absolutely have to sign a replacement, and they have to sign a goal scorer, because this is a team that has a -5 goal difference, that is 14th in the Premier League. They could slip to 15th come kick-off at Anfield on Sunday. And simply put, goals win you matches, and Manchester United desperately need to win matches. Otherwise, they could get relegated. And if they get relegated, I mean, they could still have Champions League football next season. They could be a championship side playing in the Champions League if they win Europa League. But if they go down to the Championship and they don't have European football, there will be more redundancies at the football club. I guarantee it. And I'm not talking about them pensioning off members of the playing staff. It will be people in the background, people who fans don't know the names of. They will lose their jobs. And that would be the saddest aspect of it. It was sad enough that 250 staff were cut from the workforce earlier this year in pretty callous circumstances. I completely agree that the staff was too bloated. We see people, we've seen people, haven't we, on pre-season tours that you don't see again until the next pre-season tour, and you wonder how that's sustainable. But the way Ineos have gone about it is very, very flawed. And make no mistake about it, I think there's a threat of more redundancies anyway. But if they were to somehow go down, that would be an inevitability. That's how it works at football clubs when clubs go down.
Yeah, I mean, it would be disastrous financially if this football club went down, given the position they're in at the moment. And I mean, it's a case study in itself how a club with record revenues is quite as skint as Manchester United are. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting press conference from Ruben Amorim yesterday. He's not got things right on the pitch at the moment, but off the pitch, he's getting things right. He's talking really well. You know, you mentioned before that line about this club needs a shock. I think he said people are tired of excuses at this club, talking about how he's embarrassed of being in a relegation battle. But some interesting stuff as well on his system. And I mean, it's fair to say we won't be seeing a back four at Anfield. He is absolutely wedded to this system, isn't he? And it's not going to change. And I mean, I can't even remember him changing in game yet. I thought it was interesting last night that Anthony came on for De Ligt after 83 minutes, and he simply shifted Mazraoui to right-sided centre-back and played Anthony at wing-back. It seems he is so wedded to this back three system, this 3-4-2-1, that even if he's chasing a game, this is it. This is what he plays from minute 1 to minute 90. It seems that that's been the case so far. And I mean, you've got to admire his principles that, you know, I think he said this last night, this is my only idea, or words to that effect, which I think is him trying to get the message across. But he is not going to abandon this, is he? But there's a real fine line here between his principles and the absolute dire need for results. And at the moment, the players look to be losing belief in this system pretty rapidly.
Well, there were 3 questions on whether he should change formation at his post-match press conference. And I mean, the top line from it was that he was embarrassed that the club are in a relegation fight. But probably the most fascinating answers were on why he's not going to change the system. And he made a valid point when he said that they played in a previous system of, I mean, it's 4-2-3-1 under Ten Hag. And he said they had 2 pre-seasons, they bought players for it, and they they were losing. It was going so badly that they had to change coach. And he said it would be worse if he were to change system now, and for results to still get worse. He said to, I think it was Jamie Jackson, he said, wasn't it? He said that if you know, or if I knew that results would improve by a system change, I would absolutely do it, but I don't know. And he doesn't want to take that risk of abandoning his principles, or changing his idea, as he referred to it. I think one of the concerns I have was that he said that he has to sell it to the players, and I thought he's almost undermining his own authority there. These players should not need anything selling to them. It's his way or the highway, and that's pretty clear from the way he's gone about the matches. He's been in charge of 11 games now. It has always been that formation, but he cannot be selling this formation to the players. They either accept it or they clear off. And frankly, almost any player in that squad is completely expendable at this stage, with United 14th in the table. And I don't think he should compromise on it. Ten Hag compromised after Brentford, his second game in charge. And for the remainder of that season, United were pragmatic. They had a means to an end. They had a good season. Second season, you thought, right, now implement your identity. And then things started going wrong and he was unable to do it, whether it was off the pitch, whether it was injuries, whether it was players kicking off. Of course, Jadon Sancho being the main one early on in the season, and the form just deserting them, and Ten Hag losing authority and losing his grip on things. Louis van Gaal did it after, I think it must have been his 6th game in charge. I mean, there were 2 things he abandoned less than essentially 2 months in at United. He abandoned a back 3 formation after 3 Premier League games, which of course is what he used at the World Cup that summer when the Netherlands reached the semi-final and they finished 3rd. They had a good World Cup. He thought that worked really well. I'll try and implement that at Man United. He soon realised that what works in a month-long tournament cannot work over a 9-month club season. So he abandoned that after they drew 0-0 at Burnley. And then I think it was probably the 5th league game of the season. They were away at Leicester. They were 3-1 up. And of course, then it was rush challenge, or Jamie Vardy being a nuisance gets a penalty, and United go from 3-1 up to losing 5-3. It was, at that time, it was a sight to behold, because you never ever saw United capitulate quite like that. And that game effectively nipped Van Gaal's sense of adventure in the bud. After that, United were a primarily pragmatic side that season, and it was a means to an end because they finished 4th. They had a very good purple patch in the spring where they won 6 league games. They did play some brilliant football, and there was a formation change again to 4-3-3. So he started off with a back 3. It shifted to 4-2-3-1. The season ended with them playing 4-3-3. For no reason I can think of, at the start of the following season, he changed the formation back to 4-2-3-1, and that killed United. They were so robotic. The matches were so staid. They couldn't score at home in the first half. They had that dreadful run. They was stultifying to watch. And that gives you an example of how the club can affect coaches with pretty good pedigree. And in the case of Van Gaal and Ten Hag, 2 coaches who were at Ajax, who must have felt pretty confident going into the place because of what they'd achieved at Ajax and because of what they'd overseen in terms of the playing style and the sense of adventure. And they possibly felt that Ajax and United there's a little bit of a cultural alignment there, possibly. But then that notion was shattered pretty quickly for both those coaches. So that's the cautionary tale for Amorim. If he does compromise, he may get some short-term gain, but long-term, it is probably not going to serve him well. So it is probably better to have the short-term pain on the off chance or the hope that he gets long-term gain. But again, as he said, he has to win matches, because already, I mean, he said last month it would be fair to judge him to definitively judge him 2 years in. He's not been there 2 months, and the possibility of him being sacked was raised at his post-match press conference at Molineux on Boxing Day. Not in serious terms, but United have shown this season with Ten Hag, with Dan Ashworth, that if they don't think something is working, they are prepared to cut the cord, even though the cost of it is going to be pretty substantial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Liverpool are an interesting opponent this weekend because it's pretty common knowledge that Liverpool had a long look at Amorim in the summer, to the point that it seemed that it was pretty close to being a done deal at some point. And by all accounts, they backed out because they looked at that squad and thought, this squad doesn't suit Amorim. And, clearly they got word that this was his idea. This is what he's tied to. The squad doesn't suit. So let's pivot away. And, you cannot make any kind of serious suggestion that Liverpool made a mistake with that and went for the wrong man in Arne Slot. United have obviously looked at it and thought, and with all that football knowledge they've accumulated through Ineos now, those people making that decision, Ashworth, which, maybe you did raise this, Wilcox, Barada, must have looked at that and said, okay, we can go for Amorim, but this is what he does. This squad isn't cut out to play what Ruben Amorim wants. So if we want to appoint Amorim, that's fine, but he needs a war chest to transfer in this squad. And now they're saying there is no money. So, unless there's a war chest in the summer, my only concern, and I think in principle he's a good appointment. I think he's a good coach. I think his sporting team were excellent. But if this is as good as it gets, if there is no money, if there's going to be no money in the summer, then it all feels a bit futile already, because this squad can't do it. So unless that squad can be transformed and there is going to be some money in the summer, I don't want to say there's no point going on, but do you see what I'm getting at? That it's essentially pointless appointing him if you're not going to give him the squad he needs. And now United are saying we can't give him. Well, why are we all here? I mean, it's hard to see how he can implement major change with this squad, because he's got no wing backs. He hasn't got the energy he needs. He hasn't got the physicality he needs. They're short in so many areas that it just doesn't fit, and it needs a major overhaul. But now the club are saying we haven't got the money to give it a major overhaul, and they're going to miss out on Europe, and they're going to be in the same sort of position in the summer. So, that feels a concern to me, that if Amorim is to make the success, he needs money, and where is that money going to come from?
The Europa League, they've got to put all their chips on that. I'd say that even now. I know that there's a minor. Is it minor or is it not? We have still got the second half of the season, but they have got to ensure they stay in the Premier League, which is just a sentence I never thought I'd ever utter about United in my lifetime. But if they win the Europa League, they get into the Champions League, and the quality of the Europa League has been diluted through the format change. What you see is what you get. The two favourites for the competition are two clubs in total disarray in England, in United and Tottenham. If Amorim can use these 3 midweeks coming up in January, where they've not got League Cup semi-finals, so they're 3 midweeks. I mean, this week there's a 6-day gap between the matches, which is quite handy for him. I don't think it's exactly going to make much of a difference going to Anfield on Sunday, but it is time on the training ground to really drill these players and coach them to within an inch of their life in terms of playing 3-4-3. They could have that next month, in February, provided that they qualify for the Europa League round of 16 automatically and don't need a playoff, which is absolutely in their interests. And Amorim has said that already. Then I do think it's an eminently winnable competition, because the third favourites are Athletic Bilbao, who, fair enough, they're fourth in La Liga and they've got some very good players as well. They're also hosting, their stadium is hosting the final as well, so that's another incentive for them to really make a good fist of it in the Europa League. After them, I think it's Lazio, who are fourth in Serie A, which again is good going, but these leagues are inferior to the Premier League. But then again, Athletic Bilbao are 10 places better off than United are in England. So United are installed as favourites or second favourites, but you don't look at them and currently have the belief that they can win Europa League. But if Amorim can get it right, or almost half right or 3/4 right, it feels like, in terms of just getting the players operating in that system as well as they did for the majority of the game at Tottenham in the League Cup, or certainly in the second half against City, or before City scored in that day at the Etihad, I thought United were playing pretty well. And certainly if United lost that game, they'd have been absolutely gutted, because City didn't play well and United did have opportunities and they did have pretty good control of the game as well. If they can reach those levels but have the result of the City game rather than the Tottenham game, then they can win the Europa League, absolutely. And if you win the Europa League, you're in the Champions League, you're seeded for, I don't know what the seedings work out these days, given the ridiculous change in format, but you're in the Champions League. That is the main thing. And that means more money. It means Champions League nights. It makes a huge, huge difference. So that would, of course, finance, you would think, yet another overhaul, rebuild in the summer, which is what they need. But he's also got to look after himself in the meantime to ensure that Ratcliffe doesn't pull the trigger. And when I say that, he has got to stop playing Dalot and Mazraoui as his wingers. The midfield four, people keep on saying, they're wing backs, and I understand, but that's a midfield quartet. They are meant to be wingers. The two guys he had starting at Sporting, who bookended that midfield four, were wingers. They were not fullbacks. And I know Gary Neville asked him about that last night, and he came out with some rationale that he wants Ahmad as one of the 2 10s. It suits them to have him as one of the 10s. And I get that. And it of course made the difference at City, because he was high up the pitch. He was in the right place at the right time for both goals in terms of winning the penalty and getting the winning goal. But he was also doing well as a winger, and you need a winger, at least one winger in that, on one of those two sides. He doesn't trust Garnacho. He doesn't trust Rashford. He doesn't really trust Anthony as well, who has played there, but really primarily as a substitute. And I understand that, because those players, they're not diligent wingers. They're not going to track back. Maybe Garnacho could develop that in time, although his recent cameos have been just really stunk the place out, that it wouldn't be a surprise if he's on the bench again at Anfield, even though logic would dictate he should actually start that game, just because there's no Mason Mount and you need Ahmad on the wing, and therefore that means Garnacho should go in as one of the 2 10s with Bruno Fernandes. But Amorim has got to cut out the Dalot Mazraoui double act, because it's not working. Jamie Carragher, who I need to properly watch and listen to all of his analysis, but it looked like he was on the money with a lot of what he said last night. And he said that United have not scored a goal from open play with Dalot and Mazraoui in their positions at wing back. And I thought, could that be right? But then you think of Rashford at Ipswich, and Mazraoui started. He started as one of the back three. You think of the 2 goals. Ahmad's winning goal at City, and again, Mazraoui, he started on the wing, but then he moved into the back three because Anthony came on the wing. And beyond that, obviously they got a few goals against Everton, but I think did Dalot come out of the team that day, or maybe there was an element of rotation. But essentially, Carragher was right, and I thought that is pretty staggering, but also it's not surprising, because they are fullbacks, they're not wingers. They are not going to service the striker. What could it would do with Højlund or Zirkzee up top? But maybe they would have more of a chance if I certainly think they would have more of a chance if they had Ahmad operating on one of the wings, and you try and get the balance right with Mazraoui or Dalot on the left, or an alternative, whoever that may be. But he needs to cut that out. And the other problem last night, that back three, there is no pace. And it's a lot of United fans may feel it's un-United to play three centre-backs. But you can be on the front foot with 3 centre-halves in a back three formation. But United are not going to have that with De Ligt, Maguire and Martinez. I think Lenny Yoro is going to have to play. I think Lenny Yoro is going to have to start pretty much every game in January, because you've got to start to try and get this team up to speed. Yoro was the most expensive signing in the summer. He's going to be learning on the job, but he does seem like he's actually quite quick, whereas the other 3 are not quick. And beyond them, in terms of centre halves, you've got Johnny Evans, who turns 37 in January, and you've got Victor Lindelof, who's never been quick. The positive, I suppose, in terms of the overhaul, the latest overhaul that they will have to somehow oversee next summer, is that Evans, Lindelof, Eriksen, Maguire as well, if they want to release him, they can all be released. Eriksen, Evans, and Lindelof, I'm pretty damn certain they will all go. You look at Maguire's situation and you remember what happened to De Gea, what happened to Varane, the injuries he's had. Varane was released at a younger age last year. Does anybody really think Sir Jim Ratcliffe is going to want to keep someone who's not necessarily a certain starter every week on 200 grand a week for another year when there's no guarantee that there'll be a buyer for him in the summer? I think there's quite a good chance that Maguire will be released. And if you do that, you're halving your central defensive department. It does give you the leverage to go out there and recruit more suitable alternatives. United maybe have got to be as savvy as Real Madrid have been with free agents. Madrid signed Antonio Rudiger, didn't they, a couple of years ago? They're looking at getting Trent Alexander-Arnold in. They may get Alphonso Davies in. Those two would be signed without having to pay a transfer fee. So maybe that's where United have got to be cleverer, but they have got, as far as I can tell, the guy in charge who's in charge of recruitment, Jason Wilcox, was in charge of recruitment at Southampton last season. So it doesn't exactly bode well, but maybe he'll prove us wrong.
Finally, then, Liverpool at the weekend. Fernandes and Ugarte back from suspension, at least. Maybe that'd be bad news for Rashford, who was on the bench last night but didn't come on, which felt pretty telling. I mean, give those United fans travelling down the East Lancs Road or the M62 some hope. Is there any hope? Can you see any way that United get a result at Anfield?
Well, I think we all thought it was a case of how many would they get beaten by their last season. And they emerged with a point. They got a goalless draw. They played quite creditably. They went into that having lost. I think they got, was it thumped 3-0 at Bournemouth the previous week, and they'd gone out of the Champions League in midweek, finishing bottom of their group, losing 1-0 to Bayern Munich. They were in pretty dismal form. They've had a worse December than December 2023. But I just don't see lightning striking twice. You look at United's record since they last won at Anfield, which was in January 2016. They've played 9 there. They've not won any games. They've lost 5. They've drawn 4. They've conceded 18 goals. They've scored 1 goal. That 1 goal was a goalkeeping error from Maddison that gifted Jesse Lingard a tap in a 3-1 defeat that marked the end of Jose Mourinho's reign as Manchester United manager. Their record at Anfield is just about the worst it has ever been in the history of the fixture between the two clubs. So maybe they'll, when they went there in January 2020, I think Liverpool did really bombard them for 2 spells, one in the first half, one in the second half, and United were eventually only beaten 2-0 with the second goal coming in added time. And they did have, it might have been, maybe Andres Pereira put a cross in for Wan-Bissaka of all people in the first half, and Anthony Marshall certainly had a really good chance in the second half when it was 1-0. So they did have some opportunities, but the one time where United played pretty, quite well for certainly half the game at Anfield, they were still obliterated 7-0. So these are the dire straits they're in. It is the one fixture they would absolutely not have wanted to start the new year, given the form they're in, having lost 4 in a row, lost 5. They've lost 5 and 6 in the Premier League now, having lost more games in a single calendar month since 1930 or whatever it is. If there could have been one game they would not have wanted, it would have been Liverpool at Anfield. And unfortunately for them, on Sunday, it is Liverpool at Anfield.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be back in 2025 to discuss Liverpool at Anfield and whatever unfolds on Sunday. Hopefully it won't be as bad as everyone fears, but I don't think there's anyone travelling there who thinks United have got much of a chance of getting a win at the very least. But Samuel, thanks for joining us, and have a good New Year's Eve.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all the listeners as well. And here's to a better 2025 possibly, but I don't think any of us have got many high expectations for United.
Absolutely, I will echo those sentiments. And if you've managed to get through this doomsday of a podcast to the end in 55 minutes, then you fully deserve to start the New Year's Eve boozing straight away, whatever time it is. So crack open the beer, get open the wine, get on the sherry, whatever your tipple is. You've earned it making it to the end of this podcast. Please leave us a like, leave us a review if you've enjoyed it, in inverted commas, and remember to subscribe to get the latest podcasts in your feed. We'll be back early next week to analyse events from Anfield.